Það nú þannig að menn hafa gagnrýnt mig fyrir að sýna viðtöl ótextuð en ég get víst ekki annað núna því að Black er bara nýkominn til landsins og hann er í peysunni vegna þess að fötin hans kom ekki og hann er ekki með jakkaföt eða bindið, hann er í þessari fagurgrænu írsku peysu sem fer honum ágætlega, enda er hann af írskum ættum. Black var hérna en við textum þetta hér fyrir endursýningu og ég lofa því að við setjum þetta text á netið eins fljótt og hægt er. En ég vil ekki missa þessum manni. Hann var hér í viðtali fyrir réttu ári síðan og það viðtal vakti mikla athygli og hann fór svo við hann og flutti fyrirlestur upp í háskóla. Hann er fjármálaeftirlitsmaður frá Bandaríkjunum, hefur skrifað bók sem er fræg um krísu sem þar kom upp á 9. áratugnum og var kalluð Savings and Loans. Þá fóru sparisjóðir unnvörpum á hausinn. Black var að rannsaka það með fjármálaeftirliti, með FBI og fleirum og margir sem lentu í fangelsi vegna þeirra mála og eins og ég segja, hann hefur verið að bera vitni núna fyrir þingnefndum í Bandaríkjunum. Bill Black, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
It's good to see you again. I was mentioning, and me and Thorvald, we were mentioning that you were testifying before for congressional and Senate committees now. Could you tell me a bit about that?
Well, I'll be testifying for the 4th time in a few days, but it'll have to be in writing because I'll be here. The one I'm going to do next will be on the role of crime and fraud in the global crisis. The one I did 10 days ago now was on the Lehman bankruptcy, which of course is a major issue in Iceland as well, and why that failure occurred due to the frauds. Before that, I testified on executive compensation, which again is a major reason why you see the frauds here in Iceland. And I testified about financial derivatives, which again, pretty much our disaster has resonance in your disaster.
But it seems that in America, they are taking these things much more seriously than when you were here with me on the 10th of May last year.
That's absolutely correct. There's been a sea change on those things, and that sea change is growing, and it may swamp many of the most elite institutions in the world.
So the Commission, they are investigating, of course, we have Lehman, but they're also investigating Goldman Sachs, now a very famous case, and we also have Citicorp, Washington Mutual.
Yes, people probably haven't heard of Washington Mutual, but it's actually the largest bank failure in U.S. history, and the Senate recently held hearings, and it was what we call in criminology a control fraud from front to start, just an absolute classic case, and now it's all out there in the public record. If your viewers speak and read English, they can pull up the Senate hearings and they can get very disgusted.
But what is the change? How
Now people are starting to use the F word, right? This is the F word you can use in public. This is fraud. But it's a word that didn't exist in America, except strange people like me, until about 6 months ago. And then people started to get the message because they finally started looking.
Yes.
And when you look, you find. If you don't look and you just listen to the bankers, then of course it's just a story of bad luck.
So they're starting to perceive these failures, these market failures, or what you call them, bankruptcies of some banks, the crisis, as being connected to fraud.
That's right. And then, the famous article in the United States is by a Nobel Prize-winning economist, and it was back in 1993. And it's Looting Bankruptcy for Profit. So that the looting is quite deliberate. It's run by the CEOs for their benefit and the benefit of their cronies, and it leaves the firm destroyed, but the executives and the cronies make out very well indeed.
Yes. And even Paul Krugman, who is very close to the present government, he is starting to use has started to use the F word, right?
Finally, 2 weeks ago, he used the F word, and he cited this article by George Akerlof and Paul Romer in 1993. And that's the first that's been given that kind of prominence in those circles. We
were going to talk about the Icelandic report. Have you had time to look at Well, of course, it's in Icelandic, but there's an English summary. Have you had time to look at that?
Yes, I've read the English portions, which include the summary and some of the reports by the economists and such.
Yes, and what is your opinion?
It's very much like the old joke in the United States that President Lincoln used to tell, probably our best president. He said, told the story of the farm boy. He's 7 years old, and he rushes in to his dad, and he says, Dad, please, you got to come with me. You got to come with me right away. We got to go to the barn. And his dad runs with him to the barn, and the dad's running, and he's going, what's wrong? What's wrong? And he said, the son says, well, the hired man, Steve, from the farm down the road, he's upstairs in the barn, and he's with our cook, Mary. And Steve is taking off his trousers, Dad, and Mary's hitching up her skirt. And Dad, they're going to pee all over the barn. And the farmer stops running at that point and holds his son back and says, you got your facts right, but you come to the wrong conclusion. So this is a good report in many, many ways.
Yeah.
It's not a cover-up. No. It has lots of honesty. It doesn't ask the right questions in key places. It doesn't even consider the possibility of fraud and gives this bogus thing that because we're not supposed to indict anyone, we can't find fraud.
Yeah.
Which is not true under its statutory mission at all. It's supposed to describe what caused the problem. And they have set out in the report a textbook case of accounting control fraud at all three of the big banks that destroyed this economy.
This is a textbook case of fraud?
Absolutely. Just what we write about.
All the banks?
All of the big three and many others, as you know, with them.
Please elaborate.
Accounting control fraud is the weapon of choice for financial firms. Has been for a very long time. Here are the 4 things that you do. This is the recipe if you're baking up the cake of an accounting fraud. 1, you grow like crazy. 2, you make really, really bad loans with higher yield. 3, you have extraordinary leverage. That just means a lot of debt compared to any equity. And 4, you have no meaningful loss reserves. Well, what do we learn from the report? They grew like crazy. They made extraordinarily bad loans. They had to gut their underwriting to do that, which is what you have to do. They had astonishing leverage, and they put on virtually no loss reserves while they were doing things that were going to cause 2/3 losses. In other words, for every dollar they loaned, it was as if they burned 67 cents in the United States.
Yeah. So this is a huge, what do you call it in America?
It is.
Ponzi scheme.
It is exactly a Ponzi scheme, and that's why you get the dynamic that as things get worse, they try to grow faster and they make even more insane loans. What's added to the recipe, not inconsistent with it, and was done by some savings and loans in our savings and loan debacle, is the self-funding of the shares, the buying the own stock.
Yeah, what is called weak capital in the report.
Well, that's an example of the euphemism. Weak capital, that's fictional capital. It needs to be called fictional capital.
It's not there at all. No. There's no capital. It's not weak capital, there's no capital.
Otherwise, you and I can trade back and forth, and we'll have infinite capital tomorrow. We'll own, not just the world, we'll own the universe that isn't discovered yet. Right? This is such a simple fraud. Right? This doesn't require complexity. You don't have to go to school. You don't have to study criminology. You don't ever have to have been a regulator. We can all understand that if I loan you the money and you buy my stock, it's not real. And when you add to the reciprocal nature here in Iceland, which again we had in the U.S. savings and loan debacle, there it was called the daisy chain. I help you, you help me, the other one helps the other one. And in the end of the day, we all have massive, not weak, but fictional capital. And if we do, then we can make tons of loans to ourselves and our friends, book tons of income because we're putting no loss reserves on, pay ourselves massive bonuses, and the key is this. This is mathematically guaranteed, if you follow this 4-part recipe, to produce record fictional gains and therefore record compensation, make the owners rich. But the same formula, listen to it again, grow really rapidly, make really bad loans, extraordinary leverage, no loss reserves, is also a sure thing in that it will destroy the firm.
Yes.
So both aspects are sure things. And if it goes on long enough, because you can create this fictional capital, because you can grow so massively, you will destroy not simply the firm, you will destroy the country's economy. And that is precisely what happened in Iceland.
So what you are saying is that the directors of these banks, the owners of these banks, should be prosecuted as criminals.
Absolutely. They are the criminals, and they have not just destroyed the economy of Iceland. If Iceland had not voted the way it did in the referendum, there was an existential threat to the existence of the Icelandic nation, because you could not have paid. Last year, you already had the record for all of history in Iceland out-migration.
Yeah.
You lost almost 5,000 population, and a total of 10,000 left. 4,000 and something came in. People are going to stop coming if you have to pay $16,000 per capita for a family of 4. $64,000, and as soon as a few more people, it's $80,000 for a family.
Yeah.
And who's going to leave first? The people with more wealth, more skills, who have the ties to other nations. You're in a system where you can move easily because of passports to the Nordics and to Poland, which is actually where most Icelandic folks go in many ways. And there would be no Iceland because as people left, the burden on those that stayed would get ever worse.
Yeah.
The leading export of Iceland would have become Icelanders.
But tell me how, and that's the issue of one of your lectures here. How do you prosecute cases like this? And because it seems like we have a feeling that the courts will be totally overwhelmed by all this.
Well, it's much easier in some sense. You have 3 big cases to bring here. We brought hundreds and hundreds of cases in the savings and loan context. We got over 1,000 felony convictions of senior insiders. That's the greatest success in white-collar prosecution ever. How do you do it?
That was the cases you were involved in the 80s in the United States.
80s and
the
the
90s.
90s, that's correct.
Yeah.
And so you do many of things that were done there. You form a very close partnership between the regulators who can actually understand these schemes, not to make them ultra complex, but to make them understandable to a judge, to jurors where there are jurors. And that hasn't been done historically in Iceland. Historically, as the report showed, the regulators were cheerleaders and apologists.
Yeah.
Even when they found violations, they typically did nothing serious.
Yes.
That, of course, had to stop or you would have a disaster, and it wasn't stopped, so you did have a disaster. So you get the regulators working with the prosecutors. In fact, we detail, or the Brits would say secund, regulators to work full-time and take orders from the prosecutors so that they can have, confidential information that doesn't come to us. We prioritize. In the United States context, we created a top 100 priority list to make sure we went after the most significant cases, not the little guys and gals. We discovered that there were what we call markers for fraud that were very understandable, in our case, to jurors. So we would say, for example, what is the reason why an honest lender would deliberately inflate an appraisal? And there is no honest reason. And people would start to understand, oh yes, that behavior only makes sense if you're fraudulent. And this report goes on for hundreds of pages, detailing examples that would be suicidal for an honest firm, but would optimize income for the officers controlling a dishonest firm, a control fraud.
Yes. There's another thing I know you will talk about here. That's the possibility of recovery. How do you recover stolen assets or assets that have been sort of siphoned off or hidden or whatever? Or even, are any assets there to fetch?
Right. Yes, I was litigation director for the agency that was relevant, and we brought those actions, and we brought hundreds of successful actions. We recovered over $1 billion from the top accounting firms in the United States. We recovered over $500 million from top law firms in the United States, and many other recoveries like that. So, first a caution. You're not going to get back more than a small percentage of the losses. You have to understand that going in. But you can get back enough that more than pays, many times over for the costs of the suit, and you can create some deterrence, and you can create some justice. So these people should not be allowed to destroy a nation's economy and walk away rich.
No.
That must be stopped if you have any sense of justice or any sense of deterrence or fairness or any dimension that needs to be done. So there are people who are actually quite good at recovery. So part of the court's first function is to establish liability. And again, the report details massive liability on the part of the senior officers. It just doesn't, we would say, connect the dots.
I see. Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So a prosecutor can do that, or in this case, the civil lawyers can do that. They ought to be able to win the civil cases. If they can't win the civil cases, then there's something very wrong either with your lawyers or your judges, and you have a different problem that you need to fix along the way. Recovery is not as hard in the modern era as it was in our era, because there are actually better treaties now that allow you to go after some of the tax havens. And you certainly need to suspect that some of these officers have put their money in their wife or their mistress's name or their crony's name in other countries. And that's a matter of tracking them down. Now, the prosecutors can be very helpful in that, because as they prosecute successfully more junior officers, it sends a message of, I better be able to bring something to the prosecutor to tell him or her something useful, and a good thing they can tell us is, where did the assets get hidden? Who are the people we don't know about that ended up with that villa, in Spain? Well, of course, if it's in Spain, that too will be less and not worth as much these days. So those are the types of things you do. It's a lot of hard work.
But there is money to be recovered.
Oh, yes. Immense amounts were looted. It's just that these kinds of frauds actually destroy wealth. The world is poor. Iceland is poor. And so you can't ever assume that you're going to get it all back, that there's some pot of money. Just if we dig in the right place, we'll get it all back.
But I'm thinking about how the tone of what we are talking about has changed since the crash. Now we're talking about looting, and we're talking about criminal prosecutions, and well, I think for many people, just this way of talking about these things comes as a bit of a shock.
I don't think so as much. I mean, I got emails after the last appearance. I was in that documentary made in Iceland, a very good one. I just had an opportunity to see it today. I got emails from people in Iceland. I got a lot of support from them. I mean, see, really, the alternative story makes no sense.
The alternative story is that this was a perfect storm.
Yes.
That it was just something that a bank in America fell and then it blew everything away.
Yes,
Yeah.
and it's bizarre in that it implies that if this Ponzi scheme had gone on and gotten bigger and bigger, everything would have been great.
Yes.
The losses would have been massively greater. Look at the report. Look at what they tell you about the growth in the last months. Look at what they tell you about where the money was going.
Yeah.
The incredible losses that were being created that had nothing to do with Lehman Brothers. And now have a thought exercise. Think that the big three had not gone down for another 3 years. The losses would have been 4, 5 times larger at a minimum, quite possibly 10 times larger for Iceland. The nation would have been crushed. I mean, thank God for Lehman Brothers
Yes.
and the avaricious, corrupt soul of Dick Fuld.
Yes.
You know,
But there's another thing that these are the people you have termed the enablers, the people who enable this to happen by not doing anything or by playing along with them. And it seems, of course, these corrupt bankers, they had a lot of enablers within the political system and within the regulatory system. That's a key feature of this.
it is, and not just within those systems, because your most valuable enabler, your chief ally, is your top audit firm because of its reputation. Because you use that to say, well, look, they have looked at me and all is well. And then you do the same thing with the rating agencies.
Yes.
And you pay them, and you use, in both cases, compensation. And they find their way to give you, when you're massively insolvent, which is what all three of the big banks were no later than 2004. Right? When you're massively insolvent, they give you clean audit opinions, and they give you credit ratings that are absurdly high. I know that Fitch, knocked the rating down a bit, but even when it did, the rating was 15 levels too high.
Why are they still in operation, these rating agencies?
That is something that also needs to be solved.
Yeah.
They are ludicrous. And now they're going around destroying countries,
Yes.
like Greece. So they always get it wrong in both directions. And it's because they have really perverse incentives. In my view, actually, they serve no social function.
No.
And they should be gotten rid of. If not, then they need to be made into truly professional bodies where the person getting rated does not hire and pay them.
No.
Right? It has to be more like a tax service.
Yeah, but the enablers, it's not just the accountants, it's the regulators, it is the political system. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
And the report is better, actually, on many of those things. It is almost literally true that the Icelandic government was cheerleaders. I mean, they didn't have what we call pom-poms,
No.
But they had everything else. They had suits. And they did exactly that. And they made fun and attacked anybody that told the truth.
Yes.
And this is what happens with these kinds of control frauds. The worst people in society prosper. The honest people that take them on, they seek to crush and ridicule. And that's exactly what they did. And they brought in one of the most prestigious economists in the whole Anglo-Saxon world, who blessed everything they did, again, while they were massively insolvent and massively looting the place. Now, you know that he didn't look at anything worth looking at analytically.
Yes.
Right? And he was bought and paid for by the Chamber of Commerce.
You're talking
here.
about Frederick Mishkin.
Mishkin and Porteous.
Yeah.
They're just... These are prestigious people who sold their souls, if they have any souls left, but their reputation to be able, every time someone came out with some of the truth, they sought to squash it. And they made fun of everyone who was competent and told the truth.
Tell me, to sort of wrap this up, you think So you think it's a worthwhile report? It's not a whitewash. It's thorough, but you think they're a bit too timid.
It's not just that they're timid. It has many strengths in the report. They are weak analytically in key areas. For example, at the end, when they show all the things that were being done in the last months that were looting the place even worse, they say the institution was betting on survival.
Yeah.
Just the opposite. The people running it knew that its failure was inevitable. They were taking the last bit of krona, and the last bit were substantial,
yes,
out before it went down.
Yeah.
So it's critical to understand fraud, and the report virtually doesn't discuss it, doesn't cite any of the relevant literature, didn't hire people who were expert in looking at fraud, didn't look for fraud, and therefore doesn't find any, and talks about silly things like perfect storms and betting for survival and such.
Tell me, but Professor Þorvaldur Gylfason was mentioning just before you came on that he would like to see you in an advisory position to the Icelandic authorities in these matters. Would you be willing to do that?
I'd be willing, but I think after the talk I've just given, that's not very likely.
They'll just kick you out of the country, get you on the next plane if there isn't an interruption. Yeah.
That is that danger.
But you'd like to?
Well, sure. We exist to try to stop these kinds of things. It's very frustrating when people don't listen.
Yeah.
And they listen to what we call the theoclassical economists, because it's really a religious thing for them.
Yeah, yeah. You are giving 2 lectures at the university on Monday and Tuesday, right?
Yes, the first one on prosecution and the second one on civil recoveries.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Very nice having you on. Probably, like I mentioned, you are in your Irish green sweater because your luggage got left in Amsterdam.
And of course, this is part of the heritage, after all, of Iceland as well.
En
the Celts came too.
Já, eins og ég sagði hann, þá var hann bara að koma til landsins. Við náðum ekki að taka þetta upp og texta það, þetta verður textað í útsendingu kvöld og ég reyna að setja þetta á vefinn, textað eins fljótt og hægt er. En ég vona að I hope you get your luggage back.